welcome back to 1237, and I'm back with another, art house film. Uh, Not too random because fairly recently I saw and reviewed Gaspar Noé's 2018 film Climax, and I've had this film for a while. If you go way back to my collection of controversial, uh, messed up, twisted horror film collection, this was present. I just have not rewatched it or reviewed it. In fact, I haven't seen this in probably about 10 years. And when I saw Climax, it made me want to go back to it. So, Climax was actually the second film by Gaspar Noé that I've seen. And uh, this was the second one I'm reviewing. And I actually really enjoyed it a lot more on its rewatch. And it's actually making me more interested to see more of Noé's films. And this is actually his second film from 2002, Irreversible, or I believe the French pronunciation is Irreversible. And yes, this is another one of Noé's experimental psychological art films. And after rewatching this, or actually really the only thing I remembered about this film, and then going to watch Climax, I think I have kind of a good idea on Noé's style, because he is considered an auteur. He has a very distinct style. His films have been considered cinema of the body, which means it's, to my understanding, it's a lot more visceral. Its cinematography is a lot of times either very offensive or illegible. It does have more harsh subject matter and the way that it confronts it. And also part of the new French extremity movement, or at that time, new extremity movement. And also, the first time I saw it about 10 years ago, my initial thoughts were it's there. I mean, it's cool how it tells the story, which to some people I'm sure might be a gimmick, but to me, I actually really enjoyed it. And, but on my list of like favorite controversial or most disturbing films, it it really wasn't that high. And upon rewatching it, and now that I'm really into the more art house type films, it's actually a lot higher. Which is kind of funny because at that time, back in like 2012, was when I was going through my admittedly edgelord phase, when I was purposely trying to find the most effed up, disturbing, controversial, twisted, sick films that I could find, which was when I discovered Serbian film, The Human Centipedes, Martyrs, Stuff 102, the Guinea Pig films. And this always managed to find its way on lists along with those. And, I mean, the spine says drama. Normally, actually, I'll save that, but, and I always, at that time, I was just like, one, why are these films considered artistic? I mean, there's nothing artistic about them. Is it like, or no more than any other movie? Is it the fact that, the more twisted it is, the more artsy it is? And I always said this was more artistic just because of the way it totally messes with the conventions of filmmaking. Of course, now that, at least talking about more recent and modern horror, the artsy ones are the ones that are actually my favorite of the last decade plus years. The Witch, The Lighthouse, Climax, The Other Lamb, The Feast, It Comes at Night. Which also, looking back at the aforementioned disturbing films, I can see why they're considered more art housey, just at that time, it was a new concept to me. You know, just coming off of 80s horror and slasher films, it sort of discovering art house and uh, disturbing films at the same time. I was kind of getting the wrong message, and I think I was, I think I was thinking of the word experimental when I heard the term artsy. But anyway, so yeah, I was supposed to review this long back when I did my marathon of controversial films. For whatever reason, this was the last one I had left, and I did not go back to it. And I actually started watching this last night, but with how yesterday went, I mean, I did the final packing and moving for the move. I cleaned the old apartment, then I had to go to work. So I was up for almost 20 hours. And when you consider the tricks that were used in this film, it's no wonder that I passed out last night. So yes, uh, directed by Gaspar Noé. He actually funded this film because the way the story is told, which is in reverse chronological order, he was able to fund it by cashing in on the success of Christopher Nolan's a Memento, which a lot of people have compared this to. I have seen that once. I don't really remember much of it at all. It's something I'll have to go back to. But uh, I would say this is done in more of an anthology style. And I don't really want to say that. But, you know, this literally is in reverse order. I mean, it starts with the end credits, like even the song credits going in reverse. It even does that tilting thing, which I'll get to the camera work in this. But no, you don't have characters walking and talking backwards. It's not in a rewind. It's just cut up into 14 segments that are placed in reverse order. And where each segment ends is where the previous segment started. So you could chop them up and put them in a regular order. And one of the big themes with this is time. The the opening line of the film and even a caption on screen at the very, very end is "Time destroys everything." There's a few points of dialogue that talks about time. There's also some strategic things done with time as far as when the crazy camera stuff stops and it becomes more of a still decipherable film exactly at the halfway mark. So time is a big factor with this. And it stars Monica Bellucci and Vincent Cassel, who were actually husband and wife at the time. Now, Vincent Cassel, I have seen in... He's been in a lot of things, but I know him from Black Swan. And also Albert Dupontel. There really are three main players. And apparently there was only three pages of script. Which I know with Noe, he doesn't really like scripts or dialogue. He leaves a lot of it up to the actors. And really what this movie is most known for are its two really graphic scenes. Now, is this a horror film? Which I started to mention earlier. It says drama on the title. This is, I guess, at its core, a rape revenge film. So I always said, yes, it is a horror film. As much as Last House on the Left, as much as I Spit on Your Grave, and so on and so on. But what's really interesting about this film is that, one, So a lot of people might look at this and say, well, it's really only known for its graphically violent uh, uh, a revenge scene, and it's a very graphic 9-minute rape scene. But there's still so many things that happen, even in that last almost 40 minutes after that graphic assault scene, that just makes everything that came before it all the more shocking. And it really does. It, sorry, I'm stuttering so much again. It really does kind of put in perspective just, things that are going to happen. And even towards the end, there's talk. Bellucci talks about this book she's reading that says the future is already predetermined. It's already written. There's no escape. And since we already see the future, essentially, seeing the film in reverse, everything that comes later in the film with the knowledge that we have, it kind of makes it more shocking or more painful or more sad or upsetting. And kind of makes you think about sort of like the first act of movies, things that are being set up that you think might not really be that relevant, but really everything in this movie is very important. And it's kind of hard to explain, and that's another reason why I put this movie off for so long, is because even after that rape scene, when we see the character of Alex, played by Bellucci, she leaves the party, goes outside, and she's gonna hail a cab, but there's this woman there that says, you might want to take the underpass. It's a lot safer. Of course, we already know what happens when she goes into the overpass. So it's just, it's almost like giving us knowledge of the future and then watching things lead up to it and not being able to stop it. Which also, Noe has always said that films are not a 2D experience. They're not voyeuristic. It should be a 3D experience. Not necessarily things coming at you, but you should be feeling exactly what the characters are feeling and what they're going through. Which is why, for the first, 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, the camera is just doing this very crazy thing where it's hard to decipher what's going on. Of course, as the movie goes on, it gets more and more still until we get to the rape scene where it literally looks like someone just took the camera, sat it down, and is just letting it happen. And again, that's considered the turning point of the film. But also, not only that, there's this very low frequency, I guess it was 28 hertz, barely noticeable even when it's isolated, but that frequency is supposed to promote nausea, anxiety, vertigo, along with the score, which the score has this very anxious sort of pulsing sound to it, doesn't sound like that, but it's almost to that effect. So you add those two aspects along with that crazy camera movement, it's quite hypnotic. I mean, I actually felt myself last night. I actually kind of snapped out of it at a point. Kind of my head was tilted, my mouth was open. I found myself going into a trance. And yeah, a lot of people were fainting, a lot of people were getting sick at the original screening at Cannes for this. And also, there's also the whole thing about homophobia, because the first act where the revenge takes place is at this gay S&M bar called the Rectum, where there's many uh, homophobic epithets being thrown around. And Gaspar Noé was even called homophobic quite a bit, and he even said, "No, I'm not. I even play one of the patrons at the bar." And also, you get the Gaspar Noé lighting and colors. Like, it's very, there's lots of reds, deep reds, yellows, oranges that we also saw in Climax. And also, I think going with feeling like the characters, I think that nausea and just, and when I say arbitrary, I mean like there's no specific way the camera is turning. It's almost like no way is just, you know, doing it uh, freely. Like there's no clear path that the camera is on. Almost to make us feel like the anxiety and the temper, the frustration, everything that these characters are going through. Because at that point in the film, which is in the very beginning, they have now found who has raped their friend Alex, which Alex is the girlfriend of Marcus, played by Cassell, and the ex-girlfriend of Pierre, played by Dupontel. The three of them went to this party together. She left the party because Marcus was, you know, indulging in drugs and being very flirtatious with other women. She was getting very fed up with it as she left. Even in one segment, we see that even after we see that she was going to leave and take a cab and went into the fateful underpass, that he offered to take her home. And that's what I mean. Each succeeding or preceding, depending on how you want to look at it, there was something that meant that it could have diverted everything, could have saved the day, essentially. And, you know, just when we thought, oh, it was right there, we see there's another layer to it. Like, oh, damn it, she was going to call a cab. But then we see what happens. It's like, oh, shit, he was going to give her a ride. Also, there's themes of, I've heard people say, toxic masculinity. Because, you know, the character Marcus, he is so, I guess you could say, driven by sex or whatever. And, you know, when he finds out his girlfriend has been assaulted brutally, yes, I mean, who doesn't want to avenge their girlfriend or anyone they love? But the right thing to do would have been go to the hospital and be with her, be strong for her. But he has to go seek bloody revenge. But also, this character of Pierre, who's been seen as sort of the, I don't really want to say wuss, but the less dominant, the less violent, the one who's not really indulging in partying, but also the one that seems to care for Alex more, the ex-boyfriend, because he's the one that tries to stop Marcus from flirting. He's the one that tries to make sure Alex is okay before she leaves. He's the one that gets the revenge. He's the one that takes the fire extinguisher and bashes the guy's skull in, which is the other very graphic scene. Again, the rape and the revenge. And yeah, there is some noticeable CGI when the guy's getting his head bashed in with the fire extinguisher. But like the rape scene, it is very realistic. It is very, very visceral. Very, you know, in every hit with a fire extinguisher. I mean, it's super realistic. Again, yes, there is the CGI, but one, just how hard he hits him, and just the way the other actor's head goes, and then you see like a tooth is missing. It's very realistic. And again, we also, so we see the revenge before the assault, which then, you know, it makes us think, if we saw Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave in reverse order, would we see those murders on the bad guys as justifiable? We have to come to terms with that as the movie goes on. Of course, and if you haven't seen it, spoilers here on out, but the guy he kills is not the rapist. You know, we see we see Pierre and Marcus looking for this guy known as La Tenia, or Tapeworm, the Tapeworm. They go all through the Rectum Club looking for La Tenia, and, you know, although we don't know it then, but as the film goes on, when the assault actually happens, there are two guys standing there. One of them has this black vial of cocaine that he shared with this other guy, but Marcus is like, okay, one of you is the tapeworm that I'm looking for. Which one is it? But the other guy is the one that kind of gets mouthy or confrontational, so that's the one where the fight ensues. And he's the one that gets killed. Even though the other one is the one that did it, and he's unharmed. So much so that even when that killing is over, the camera pans over to this random person who's just kind of sitting there smiling. But then when we get to Alex's assault, we see that as that guy. Also, in the very first scene, which actually the first scene is of these two random guys, but I'll get to that. While Marcus is being led onto the ambulance on a stretcher, because we see his arm get pinned down and then broken. You know, we hear people yelling at them like, "Oh, those two slurs, you know, didn't pay, and, you know, have fun in prison." And we hear someone say, "Oh, you know, they're gonna," again, graphic warning, that you're gonna go to prison and they're gonna make your ass bleed like Alex's did. So even after all that, you know, after watching the whole film and thinking about those things in the very beginning / end, like, so he's still taunted. Like, just further shows that a revenge took place, but not on the right person, but that guy was there, and he's still taunting them at the end. So yeah, Pierre was the one that thought he was getting the revenge. He was the one that had to save, essentially save Marcus and avenge Alex. So even when we find out that it's this assault revenge film, and we see the revenge first, I mean, the fact that it's the wrong person, and we even hear the person afterwards say, "Hey, they're gonna do to you what I did to her." And also the very first shot of the film is of these two random guys, where one is telling the other one a story. Well, he says time destroys everything, but then he talked about how he served time because he had an incestuous relationship with his daughter. And that alone is horrific. But then we consider some of the dialogue during Alex's assault, where he's kind of talking about himself like daddy. just, it's almost like this thing that kind of keeps popping up even later on in the film, because she is assaulted anally. And that much later in the film, that when we see uh, Marcus and Alex together in their apartment before the party, he makes a joke like, "Oh, I want to have anal sex with you." She's like, "Oh, stop, no." So it just kind of things that will always stick in your mind that just makes it seem just a little bit worse. And then almost way towards the end, we see that she takes. She said that she missed her period, and so she takes a pregnancy test. And judging by her reaction, it was positive, because also we see her sitting there like this, and that's when the camera sort of does one of these, and when it pans up behind her on the wall is a 2001 Space Odyssey poster, the shot of the newborn baby. And so there's just like little things like that that make you think about either what you've already seen, which means what is to come later for the characters, that just makes it a little bit more harsher, which I think is genius. Now, which film would I say I liked more between this or Climax? Uh, I'd probably say Climax was a much bigger experience of the senses, but I think there's a lot more going on technically with Irreversible. It, I honestly don't think I can pick a favorite between the two. I like both of them very much, but for very different reasons. Uh, the violence is very hard hitting with this, as it was in that. I mean, even after Alex is assaulted, what he does to her violently is, again, very realistic. I mean, the way he kicks her twice. I mean, you can almost hear her nose breaking on the second kick. And I do want to say, even if you can watch films like Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave or any other movie that has sexual assault in it, this is the most realistic that I've ever seen. I would put it up there with Once Upon a Time in America. Obviously, I think this is a bit more brutal and mean-spirited and visceral, but yeah, it's up there with Once Upon a Time in America. I'd probably say more brutal than that. I think that's maybe just maybe both equally realistic, but I think this one is just has more of a bite. It is more brutal and vicious. And again, they just set that camera down, let it happen for like 9 minutes. The camera doesn't move until they're sort of back to, and also Bellucci and the actor that played her attacker, whose name I can't remember, they're sort of back to, and he's on top of her. The camera then gets picked up and moves quickly around them so he can bash her face into the concrete. But that shot of the underpass, it reminded me a lot of Climax. I love how Noe shoots hallways, just with the lighting, the colors, that weird angles that he does. I think they're called Dutch angles. Just a very visceral film. And I mean, the sexual content, even other than the assault, is just as graphic. I mean, there's some sexual stuff going on both at the gay S&M bar and the party that they're attending. And I mean, it always feels weird to say I enjoyed a film with this kind of content, which I did, but I really love this movie for, No Way really knows how to bring the viewer into what the characters are going on. I mean, like in climax, toward especially towards the end, when it's just that dark red lighting, and then that's when it does that weird, you, you know, spinning of the camera in no real indecipherable way, almost as if to capture the nightmarish peak of a trip, of an LSD trip. Very much with this, I think, because the camera gets still during and after the assault scene. Like, if you were to watch this in regular order, from that scene on, that's when the camera starts, gradual, and then just by the end of it, it's so chaotic. And then with that frequency and the score really helps capture just the anxiety, the rage, and everything that Marcus and Pierre were going through at that point in the film. And yeah, it's just another movie that is quite an experience on every level. And, it's another reason why I love art house films. I really do. And while I may not be interested in all of No Way's films, like Love, I might not. That's not super high on my list, but I've always wanted to see I Stand Alone, Enter the Void. I hear mixed things, but that's probably his film I hear the most about. He has an upcoming film called Vortex that I'm very interested in. And yeah, just really like what he did with this movie. I didn't appreciate it at first, the first time I saw it, but now, 10 years later, I really love what he did with this. And it's very effective. And just so many small details, calculated details. Like, even when we see something like a cop light that spins, or like a lawn sprinkler that's spinning clockwise, the camera goes counterclockwise. And then when you consider the reversed chronological order, it really almost creates like a paradox of which way everything is spinning, which one's clockwise, which one's counterclockwise. It does feel like unbroken shots, because whenever we cut at the end of a segment to the beginning of the next one, it's almost like the camera goes outside or looks towards a light, and it hides the transition very well, or hides the cuts very well. Just a lot of it feels unbroken, which I'm always a sucker for. And yeah, I feel like I'm losing my voice. It's been a while since I've done a video, so and trying to make them shorter, but it's not working. So yeah, of all, if you go back to my disturbing horror collection, this was the one that I didn't do. Actually, I still haven't done Necromantic 2, and I don't know why, but yeah, and that was because I kind of dismissed this movie. And I'm not even sure why, but now, of all the movies in that collection, this one has got to be one of, if not my favorite. I mean, I already love experimental films so much. I love art house films. And yes, I would say this is a much better, more artistic film than other art house horror films, especially like Angel's Melancholy, which I do have now. But yeah, it's a very visceral experience. And don't just think you only need to see the two graphic scenes, the revenge, the rape, because there are things throughout each segment that makes everything before it or the future for the characters just that much more hard hitting. Like her going under the overpass or underpass where her attack happens, and then two consecutive segments. It's like there was a way out, and you know she's not gonna take it. And then when she talks about that book about how the future is predetermined, it's just a very unrelenting, very interesting, very effective film. Gaspar Noé's 2002 Irreversible. Very well made film. But anyway, thank you for watching.